Let's see, I'm Sarah Free. I'm one of the general pediatricians here at Sanford. I'm one of Dr. Struby's continuity clinic attendings. Dr. Struby, she did her undergraduate degree in Minnesota at Minnesota State in Moorhead. She then went to Tennessee where she did her master's in clinical anatomy and went to medical school there. During her time in Tennessee, she was a firefighter with the Cumberland Gap Volunteer Firefighter Department. And then after medical school, she came up here to Sioux Falls for her pediatric residency. She's been a very strong resident. Anybody that's worked with her will tell you she has a great sense of humor. She's a hard worker, and she is good at staying calm under pressure. During her third year outpatient rotation here at Sanford in our clinic, she did it in August, which is the craziest, busiest month of the year in clinic. I think she set the record for the most patients seen during an outpatient rotation, and she made it look easy. After graduation this summer, she will be joining Sanford as a general pediatrician, and we could not be more excited to have her. We're very lucky. Her talk today on caffeine is very timely, and hopefully she'll help us stay up to date on all the trends in adolescent and pediatric caffeine intake. With that, please help me welcome Dr. Struby.
Okay, we're gonna go without a mic, but people just raise a hand or something if you can't hear me, but I feel like my voice is fairly loud. Thanks for that lovely introduction, Dr. Free. Very excited to talk to you guys about caffeine today in the pediatric world, specifically outpatient is our focus. When I was trying to come up with a topic for Grand Rounds today, I was trying to find something that was interesting, I think something I could relate to and something that was relevant in pediatrics. It brought me back to 7th grade. I did a poster presentation in health class on caffeine. It was also the first time in my life I had to take a career aptitude test, and it said I would either be in the performing arts or in healthcare. I'm very happy to report that I went down the healthcare route. So I thought, what a cool way to kind of bring a full circle moment, getting towards the end of my training, talking about caffeine again in our pediatric population before becoming a pediatrician myself. These two.
Sure.
Yeah, that works. So with that being said, we're going to talk about caffeine use in pediatrics, some history, risk benefits, and long-term considerations. Some objectives that I want to focus on today. I'm hoping you get more from this talk than just these 3 things, but I figured 3 objectives is simple enough for people to kind of remember. The first one is recognizing that caffeine is found in a wide variety of products, not only food, but also drinks and other supplements. To be mildly familiar with their caffeine content, especially when you're talking to kids in clinic. Recognizing different organizations and their considerations for safe daily caffeine use, and recognizing effects of caffeine in the body, especially some things that have been studied, outcomes of caffeine use in the pediatric population specifically. So before kind of deep diving into this talk, my question to you is, are you using caffeine? Kind of think about yourself. What are you taking during the day? Is it just coffee? Like, what are all the different products you're ingesting? Are you aware that there's caffeine in those products? And do you think you're taking a safe amount of that? And then think about other people that you may know who you think are taking a lot of caffeine consumption in their body. And then think about some kids that you're seeing either in clinic or people that are in your home and that you know, are they also taking or consuming caffeine? And do we know how much they're taking as well? Then to sprinkle in a lot of different products to be familiar with, we're going to play a little game of like this or that, comparing different caffeinated products and their milligram content in them. This will kind of help break up the presentation because I feel like it can get a little dry. So this will be something colorful to kind of look at and talk about. So on our first episode of this or that, comparing black coffee to green tea, a typical cup of black coffee is around 80 to 100 milligrams, and then green tea, also caffeinated, 30 to 50 milligrams. Some brief history and introduction. This is more in the coffee sense, coming from coffee beans specifically. There's supposedly a goat herder named Kaldi in Ethiopia who first discovered the beans after noticing his goats became unusually energetic after eating berries from a certain tree. He went over, he tried the berries himself, and he also enjoyed the effects that it had on his body. So he began using it more regularly and started telling people about it. Word quickly spread to others, so they started using the berries as well to stay awake during long hours of prayer by boiling the berries in water. From there, we had global spread from Ethiopia to Yemen in the 15th century. There was a port city there, also called Mocha, that became a large trading center for coffee. And this gives rise to the mocha drink that a lot of people know and love today. By 16th century, it reached the rest of the Middle East, Persia, Turkey, and North Africa. It arrived to Europe around the 17th century with fear, initially calling it the bitter invention of Satan because of the effects it had on the body. But the Pope at the time, Clement VII, loved it and endorsed it, and it quickly gained popularity in England as well. By 18th century, coffee came to Brazil. This is our world's largest producer of coffee and distributor, still to this day. And by 20th century, people started kind of tweaking recipes and coming up with different forms of coffee that can be taken in. And Italy invented the espresso at this time. There's also some labor, ethics, and politics involved in the coffee and tea trade. These industries were deeply intertwined with slave trade and colonialism, using people to clear land, plant, harvest, and process beans under brutal conditions. Again, like we all know, similarly with no pay, no housing, and horrible conditions they were working in. And then just a little bit on politics. That picture might look familiar to people that have been in a history class, but this is the Boston Tea Party, where people were going against the grain here. And in the middle of the night, they dumped 92,000 pounds of tea into the Boston Harbor, which would be worth about $1 million if it happened today. Okay, coming to our next comparison, this or that. Espresso. I feel like a lot of people think of this as more caffeine than a cup of coffee, but it's actually about 60 milligrams of caffeine. And then comparing that to black tea, also 50 milligrams of caffeine. So when you're ordering espresso, you might think you're getting more bang for your buck, but really you're not. So what is caffeine specifically? It is 1,3,7-trimethylxanthine. It is a pharmacologically active component of many food, drinks, and supplements. It is also used to treat apnea of prematurity in the NICU setting, but this is a large topic for a different day, so we'll not be covering it today. It can occur naturally in plants, seeds, and fruits, and it is the most consumed stimulant worldwide. It is also a legal stimulant that is consumed worldwide. Some mechanisms of action we're talking about, three that we're going to touch on. First is antagonism of adenosine receptors. 2 is mobilization of intracellular calcium storage. 3 is inhibition of phosphodiesterase. Through blocking of the adenosine receptors, specifically A1 and A2A, there's some other subtypes we'll talk about. Caffeine can competitively antagonize their effect, which causes increased release of dopamine, norepinephrine, and glutamate. This is even visible at low doses, such as a single cup of coffee. This results in lower pain perception, more sustainable and forceful muscle contraction, and maintaining or increasing firing rates of motor units, allowing for greater strength production. Kind of digging a little bit deeper on that first mechanism of action with antagonism of the adenosine receptors. There are 4 that are identified that we'll talk about: A1, A2A and B, and A3. A1 and A2 receptors bind caffeine at low doses. A2B, which is a subtype of A2, only binds at high doses. The A1 is distributed throughout the brain with highest density in the hippocampus, cortex, and cerebellum, and A2A is expressed in high density in the striatum, nucleus accumbens, olfactory tubercles, and amygdala, with some weak expression in the globus pallidus and nucleus of the solitary tract. So dopamine and caffeine, again, likely mediated through this inhibition of adenosine receptors and antagonism. It's localized in those dopamine-rich areas of the brain. A2A specifically is co-localized with D1 and D2 dopamine receptors, and activation of adenosine A2A decreases dopamine binding at these D2 receptors. Through all these interactions, caffeine can directly potentiate dopamine transition, modulating the reward and addiction properties in the nervous system stimuli. Little bit on genetics. There has been a lot of kind of research and news out there that caffeine use, tolerance, and dependence is a heritable trait, suggesting that there is a component to this genetic-wise. There are some studies that reported a link in polymorphisms in the A2A gene specifically with caffeine sensitivity and consumption. There were also a bunch of other genes that I read about, but I did not include them here because I think there's a lot more research that needs to be done before saying that, hey, this gene is linked to caffeine use, tolerance, and all of that. Timing and absorption. After ingestion, it is quickly absorbed by the GI tract into the circulatory system. After absorption, it gets into all body tissues and crosses the blood-brain barrier, blood placenta barrier, and blood testes barrier. Peak blood caffeine levels are typically reached 1 hour after ingestion, and the half-life in humans ranges quite a bit from 2 to 12 hours, but it's usually between 3 to 5 hours. If you kind of think about your own personal caffeine use, like when are you kind of thinking, oh, I need to go get some more? It kind of falls within that range, I feel. Okay, next comparison. These are 3 very like newish products that are out there. I think it's important to talk about them. I included something on the far right that we'll go into in a second. But the first 2, these are new energy drinks. Most energy drinks contain about 200 milligrams of caffeine. These are marketed very colorful products. They're also now marketed as a health product and are marketed directly towards like teenagers, young adults mostly. The one on the far right, also known as Bubbler, this is marketed towards younger children, kind of pre-adolescent, adolescent, and teenagers. It is actually basically marketed as a sparkling water that boosts your energy. So I feel like there's a lot of parents out there that maybe don't know that there's caffeine content related to that. And it's in the same can, same ounces as all of the other drinks that are up here. So I think it's also important to, when you're going over caffeine use in clinic, when you're asking about products and they say, oh, Bubbler, kind of saying, hey, did you know there was caffeine in that? Because I found from personal experience that either the child or the parent in the room did not know that it contained caffeine. And then I was recently on a vacation where they were having a little table giving out free samples, and everybody in line was a pre-adolescent girl. So it's definitely being kind of forced onto that population. Some consumption trends and guidelines. Current estimates in a 2017 systematic review suggested the mean caffeine consumption of all ages is about 165 milligrams per day, about 100 of that coming from coffee. The review focused on 5 outcomes in 380 studies. We'll kind of talk about this sprinkled out throughout the presentation because a lot of the studies and research talks about all of these things very commonly. So I figured it was easier to just talk about them in bulk instead of bringing them up over and over. But this specifically talked about calcium and bone status, cardiovascular health, behavioral health, reproductive mental health, and acute toxicity. And again, all ages, this was children, adolescents, pregnant females, and healthy adults. The next one is going over caffeine intake in children, and this was a 10-year trend survey study that went out. They essentially said that there were no differences in caffeine consumption in males and females. They also saw that African-American children were less likely to consume caffeine than white American and Mexican-American children. And they saw increasing linear trends in caffeine use as age increased. So obviously thinking about ourselves and maybe other people that we know, as we're getting older, we're consuming more and more caffeine. This is trying to be true here. Okay, another comparison. This one I think is also very important. This is also a new brand that came out recently in the past couple of years. Started by an influencer who is very much into streaming services and social media. This is also being marketed towards young children, pre-adolescent age more specifically. Prime, there are 2 versions of it. They will be same color, same flavor, just in 2 different vehicles of drinking. The one on the left, Prime Energy, this is 200 milligrams of caffeine, similar to a typical energy drink. And then the one on the right, Prime Hydration, has no caffeine. This is marketed more as an electrolyte drink. So again, when talking in clinic to families, just saying, hey, are you taking any caffeine? What do you like to drink? If they're saying Prime products, I think you need to be more specific on which Prime they're drinking. Because I've also found in exam rooms that parents or the child did not know that there was a caffeine containing product with this brand. Who are some of our key players? Caffeine is generally recognized as safe by the US Food and Drug Administration. Health Canada has a maximum daily caffeine intake guidelines that they set for children and adolescents. 10 to 12-year-olds should not be consuming more than 85 milligrams per day. Again, this is about 1 cup of coffee, and no more than 2.5 milligrams per kilo per day for adolescents 13 to 18 years of age. There are no specific recommendations in the United States currently. However, the American Academy of Pediatrics reports that caffeine and other stimulant substances contained in energy drinks have no business being in the diet of children. And then I think considering all these new products that are also food products and other dietary supplements, they would probably add that into that statement as well. And then we have European Food Safety Authority, in 2015 that listed adult caffeine consumption max at less than 400 milligrams per day, and similar to Health Canada, 3 milligrams per kilo per day in healthy children and adolescents. And they also had a statement on pregnant women as well to not take more than 200 milligrams per day while pregnant, which I feel like is followed, generally speaking, in the US as well. Also important because we do see pregnant patients in the pediatrics clinic. Going back to that 10-year trend survey study that was done, caffeine intake in 2 to 19-year-olds increased again in that study. A majority of these people, 71%, were consuming caffeine on any given day. The results showed that in adolescents, 12 to 19, this was the population of study, caffeine intake at the 90th percentile was 2.45 milligrams per kilo per day, which is basically identical to Health Canada's recommendations for max intake for this population. Okay, moving on to some food products that we'll sprinkle in here. These are two, I feel like, generally well-known, more marketed towards the young adult population. The one on the left is newer within the last 5 years. These are granola bars that are marketed as a health food option. I believe you can only purchase these online. I've never seen them in the store. They are smaller, like a candy bar size granola bar, are marketed as low calorie, low sugar, and they have the same amount of caffeine as a cup of coffee, 80 grams, which they put in there on the product itself. On the bottom right-hand side, it says 1 cup of coffee. They now also make a protein bar that is also low calorie, low sugar with 80 milligrams of coffee. So very interesting for people that are consuming that in the afternoon or in the morning. Then the one on the right-hand side, this is just a plain old chocolate bar. You can get these at gas stations, grocery stores, and specialty grocery stores. These also have caffeine as well, 100 milligrams per serving. These bars are not like a full-size Hershey bar, but like a smaller granola bar type size. And these have been out for quite some time. So how are kids consuming caffeine? This was a national review in 2018. They showed that coffee was the primary source of caffeine amongst all age groups, followed by soft drinks and tea products. Greatest prevalence of energy drink consumers was found among 13 to 24-year-olds. And among children and adolescents, carbonated soft drinks was the greatest caffeine product that was consumed. There are similar trends across other countries. However, tea is more common in other non-US countries. Touching briefly on sleep and caffeine, we'll talk about this particular study a little bit later, but this was back in 2017. A relationship between caffeine, sleep, and behavior in children. Caffeine consumption differed by the amount of sleep these children got, and this was found to be statistically significant. Post hoc analyses showed that children who slept more in the evening, 9 to 11 hours, consumed less caffeine during the day, compared to children who slept less, 7 to 8 hours a night, consumed more caffeine during the day. We'll touch on that a little bit later. Coming up to another comparison, this is more on the water side of things, which I also think is very interesting. So the product on the left, I have personally never seen this out and about, but it is a product that you can find called Water Joe. It looks like a typical water bottle. It is colorless, flavorless, and if it wasn't facing your direction when you picked it up, you might just think it's plain old water. It has 70 milligrams of caffeine in that, which again is comparable, a little more than an espresso and a little less than a cup of coffee. And then the product on the right, again, very colorful, in the same cans as energy drinks, being marketed towards people who need to stay awake to focus on something like homework, studies, or at your job. But it is called a sparkling water that has 75 milligrams of caffeine. I've also never seen this product, but it is out there for purchase online. And it also health food drinks, so 0 sugar, 0 calories as well. Some caffeine benefits that can be seen in the short term: increased endurance and attention, increased vigilance, reduced reaction time, and perceived positive effects on mood, cognition, and physical performance. Some supposed long-term benefits are reduced risk of type 2 diabetes. This is obviously in our low sugar, low calorie caffeinated drinks. Some improved sports performance and endurance, and even some weight reduction due to increased energy expenditure from the caffeine itself. Again, this is those low calorie, low sugar options. Some special considerations in Olympic athletes. The International Olympic Committee listed caffeine among their prohibited substances due to its cognitive, muscle, and motor control effects, thus affecting sports performance. Professional athletes used to be tested for this, and they would be positive if they had more than 12 micrograms per liter in the system of their urine. That's about 5 or 6 cups of coffee in a given day, and they were then banned from events like the Olympics. This was taken off of the doping list in 2004, so a little over 20 years ago, by the World Anti-Doping Agency due to its large presence in food and drink products, which is something that was very interesting to kind of learn about. Again, going over caffeine, sleep, and behavior again in this 2017 study, they found that most children were consuming caffeine, and their caffeine ranged from 0 to about 150 milligrams per day, which was equivalent to a bar of chocolate or half a liter of Red Bull. Although coffee and tea contributed to the greatest amount of caffeine per serving, the most consumed caffeinated product in this study was actually chocolate. Caffeine consumption did not differ between sexes, but they did find associations between consumption and age, socioeconomic status, and puberty status. Obviously, we saw in a previous study that as age increased, caffeine consumption increased. The socioeconomic status, I'm thinking more of where you're living and the means to go get caffeine. So larger cities, you have more options of getting caffeine, more stores, businesses that are selling it. And then higher means also the ability to have a car to drive to these places, having the money to purchase these products as well. And then puberty status, there were some studies in there that suggested that hormone changes has something to do with your caffeine consumption. I didn't include those in this discussion because I think there's a little bit more research that can be done in that area. But most of it was essentially saying that there's a big change in the culture of going through puberty and going from middle school to high school, all these different changes. So it was cooler to, follow the trend. So everyone else is drinking caffeine, so I need to drink caffeine. It's also, it's cool for me to do. Also staying up late to go to sleepovers, late night events, things that other kids are doing, or sporting events. And then because all these newer products are being marketed towards younger children and also being marketed as health products as well, I think that has a lot to do with it. Okay, moving on to another well-known brand that I admit that I go very frequently to, especially since they entered the hospital. It's been a little bit of a blessing and a curse for my bank account. This is Starbucks. All of these are size medium or grande in Starbucks language. These are things that I frequently will order when I go there. They all have very different caffeine content in the same size drink, which is very interesting. Vanilla latte, about 170 milligrams, has a couple shots of espresso in there. A shaken ice espresso has quite a bit of espresso in it, so you're really going to get a good buzz from this. It has more caffeine than an energy drink. Just FYI for people that are ordering that. And then pumpkin cream cold brew, which is a lovely seasonal drink, about 185 caffeine. As we've already kind of talked about, there is hidden caffeine content in a lot of other products that are not just caffeine and energy drinks. We've seen water so far. There's also caffeinated gum. 2 brands, Jolt and Stay Alert, and there's also mints that are gaining popularity and being marketed towards younger people. We also have some candy bars. Snickers Charged was one back in the day. This product is no longer available for sale retail-wise, but I did look it up on eBay, and you can buy an expired one on eBay. So keep your eyes open for that. Also have caffeinated potato chips and caffeinated oatmeal that are products that are available. Going over 2 of the products now. Again, that Snickers Charged on the right has 60 milligrams of caffeine in a normal size Snicker bar. Again, you could find it online if you really wanted it. I probably would not do that, but to each their own. And then on the left-hand side, this is a chip brand called Banger's Chips, a product that is located online only. I've never seen it in stores. It has the same amount of caffeine as an energy drink, and it is located in those lovely little child-sized bags, 2.5 ounces. So snack bags that we get when we come to conferences like this. So that also would have quite an effect on the body, especially if you were taking in other caffeine products during the day. Some symptoms attributed to consumption of caffeinated beverages in adolescents. This was kind of amongst several different research articles and studies I was looking at, but the most commonly reported physical and emotional symptoms were cravings, frequent urination, and difficulty falling asleep. Symptoms were not associated with particular age, gender, race, or ethnicity. And as a lot of us well know, caffeine is known to cause increased sleep latency, decreased sleep efficiency, and decreased overall sleep time. Healthykids.org is a great resource for parents as well as providers. It is through the American Academy of Pediatrics. Again, American Academy of Pediatrics says that there's no need for caffeine in the body of children. And then the adverse effects that are listed on their website specifically that parents will see is fast or regular heartbeat, elevated blood pressure, rapid breathing, anxiety or nervousness, GI distress, and again, sleep disturbance. This is probably really hard, or you guys might be able to kind of see some of this, but this was a short review done in 2021, so fairly recent, that was going over caffeine doses and then the effects that were seen with that in several different studies. This table I wanted to include in the discussion today. It is kind of separated almost down the middle there. The top half is the studies that were done in milligrams per day, and then the bottom half is the milligrams per kilo per day. We don't have to go through every single thing in here, but essentially the lower doses of caffeine that were consumed during the day, they had more of those positive things that we're seeing, more alertness, feelings, positive mood, better performance, things like that. And as dosage increased, we started seeing more of the nervousness, jitteriness, anxiety, and GI distress. And then towards the middle of that, was this thing, Mark? Oh, mouse. Okay, I'm going to use this. Can you see that? Oh, maybe not. Forget it. Towards the end of the middle there, the 3,000 milligrams per day was considered lethal in this particular study, but obviously if you're getting into the thousands, you're going to have a lot of adverse effects there. And a lot of those people were actually hospitalized for the side effects of caffeine. And it's very similar for the milligrams per kilo per day as well. Other adverse effects, this was again in that same systematic review that we talked about at the very beginning of this in 2017. Possibility of caffeine ingestion adversely affecting human health at moderate levels. This was again 300 milligrams in healthy pregnant women and 2.5 mg per kg per day in children and adolescents was investigated. Moderate doses, they were calling 200 to 300 milligrams per day. This is where people were having enhanced feelings of well-being, improved concentration, increased arousal and energy, better cognitive performance and vigilance, and reduced reaction time. And then high doses were considered greater than 400. And that's where people started feeling the adverse effects of anxiety, nausea, jitteriness, nervousness. Going back to sleep again, we do know that there's that link between sleep loss and caffeine intake, increased sleep latency, and decreased sleep efficiency. Few studies have intended to explore the relationship between this in children younger than 12, mostly focusing on adolescents and adults. Go figure, who wouldn't want to subject their young child to a large amount of caffeine just to watch them not sleep and wreak havoc in the home. It would be cool if we could see that, but obviously it's understanding why it is not there for us to kind of review. In school-aged kids, studies found that higher caffeine consumption was associated with the shorter total sleep time and greater incidence of sleep problems, and other domains of sleep, such as sleep-disordered breathing, bedtime anxiety, and nighttime arousals were not associated with caffeine consumption. Caffeine was significantly associated with morning tiredness, poor sleep routine, restless sleep as well, and problematic internalizing behaviors. Modeling of the association between these factors indicated that the sleep variables are mediated by the relationship between caffeine and behavior. Some internalizing behaviors that we're seeing with the higher caffeine consumption, this was in 14-year-olds in some of the studies reviewed, mostly in coffee and soda. It was shown to be associated with increased symptoms that were associated with mood issues, more depression, anxiety. Most of the things that were experienced or noted were externalizing behaviors. In girls in grades 6 through 10 who reported high consumption, were 1.5 times more likely to have somatic complaints, so backaches, headaches, and stomach aches, compared to low caffeine intake individuals of the same grade. Increased caffeine was shown to be related to increased aggression in children 14 to 15 years of age and was strongly related to increased violent behaviors and conduct disorder in kids 10 to 12 years of age. Again, other externalizing behaviors that we're seeing in other articles were headaches, irritability, and being tired. And caffeine intake of 100 to 400 milligrams was again associated with adverse effects in some of the studies. There is a growing body of literature that suggests that, like illicit drugs and tobacco, caffeine use in adolescents and young adults is associated with impulsivity, sensation-seeking, and risk-taking behaviors. Caffeine use greater than 240 milligrams per day was associated with an increase in those impulsivity and sensation-seeking behaviors. This was specifically in 60 psych students at a college where they saw this. And then another study conducted in adolescents showed that high caffeine use was associated with daily cigarette use, aggressive behavior, attention problems, and conduct problems. Touching very, very briefly on brain development, because of the continued brain development that we see through infancy, childhood, and adolescence involving myelination and pruning processes, we can say that children may be more likely to be sensitive and caffeine naive. Some long-term risks that we're seeing, there's some evidence that has linked caffeine intake in children to sleep dysfunction. Again, elevated blood pressure, impairments in mineral absorption and bone health, and increase in alcohol use and dependence. Routine use of caffeinated sugar-sweetened beverages can contribute to weight gain and dental cavities. High levels of caffeine consumption greater than 450 regularly has been shown to increase risk of cardiovascular disease in some studies, but there were also an equal amount of studies that said that there was no effect at all. High levels of caffeine use is associated with calcium excretion and bone loss, which can contribute to osteoporosis. There is data differing among studies. However, most of them agree that high levels in women trying to conceive and become pregnant can end up with higher rates of spontaneous abortion. So obviously recommended dosage for women while pregnant, we learned earlier, was less than 200 milligrams per day. And then in another study, it said that women trying to conceive and become pregnant should limit use to less than 300 milligrams per day. There was another trial in obese adolescents that showed that a combination of caffeine and ephedrine resulted in greater weight loss than placebo, suggesting that it could be a future treatment plan for weight management in children and adolescents, keeping in mind the side effects, both of those things causing tachycardia and probably a couple other things. There's another study that reported that for every additional serving of a sugar-sweetened beverage consumed daily, there was a 60% chance of that child becoming obese later in life. And the study showed that children who did consume more soda per week were less likely to have appropriate servings of milk, fruits, and vegetables as well. Okay, now moving on to supplements. We are comparing 3 different supplements, all same caffeine content, so 50 milligrams. The product on the far left, NZE pouches, this is marketed as like a chewing tobacco or dip product. So it's a caffeinated minty flavored pouch that rests in the lip of your mouth that you suck on for some time. I don't know exactly when this would expire, but eventually it will be spit out. That people are doing, again, marketed towards younger people. The middle is gum, again, same amount of caffeine, also mint flavored. And this one says gym gum, sugar-free, keto-friendly. So again, brightly colored, healthy. Everyone's going to be doing this when they're going to the gym. It'll get you pumped, 50 milligrams. And then the product on the far right, which I feel like is more marketed towards children. It is a chewable caffeine supplement that is a chocolate caramel flavor, I believe. Same milligrams as the other 2 products. So a question that I think about from time to time, I don't know if it's crossed anybody else's mind, but is caffeine addictive? DSM-5, this is the most recent version, was published in 2013. It was the first edition to include and recognize caffeine-related disorders. An essential feature of substance use disorder is a cluster of cognitive, behavioral, and physiological symptoms indicating its continued use despite the negative effects that it can cause. According to DSM-5, a diagnosis of substance use disorder can be applied to all 10 classes of drugs in the chapter except caffeine. So alcohol, cannabis, hallucinogens, all these other illicit drugs, even other stimulants are included in substance use disorder, but not caffeine, which is a legal stimulant that a good majority of people are using, as we can see. So when considering something as substance use disorder, there are several criteria that you go over in the DSM-5. I'm going to go over all of these, and I want you to kind of think in your head. We're going to end everything with using like coffee or a caffeinated product and kind of see what you guys think. Criteria 1, you're taking larger amounts of coffee over time than you once intended to achieve the same effects. Criteria 2, expressing desire to cut down or unsuccessful efforts to decrease or discontinue use because of the effects. Criteria 3, spending a great deal of time obtaining, using, or recovering from the substance. So like being late to work because you had to stop to get a coffee drink on your way in. Criteria 4, cravings or intense desire, that 3 o'clock feeling that many of us have where we're needing to go get that second drink in the afternoon. Criteria 5 through 7, social impairments, again, missing out on work, school, home, hobbies, or extracurriculars to obtain the product of choice. Criteria 8 and 9 is risky use. doesn't necessarily have anything to do with caffeine, but still in the substance use disorder criteria. And then criteria 10 or 11, tolerance and withdrawal, which I think also applies to caffeinated products. Going directly into the DSM-5, screenshots taken from it. We'll go over some of these caffeine-related disorders. First one is caffeine intoxication and toxicity. Criteria A is recent consumption of caffeine at higher doses greater than 250 milligrams. And criteria B is experiencing 5 or more of the following signs and symptoms developing during or shortly after caffeine use, all things that we've already talked about. So restlessness, nervousness, excitement, trouble with sleeping, can have flush face, diuresis, GI distress, some muscle twitching, tachycardia, changes in speech, and some agitation as well. Criteria C is signs or symptoms can cause a lot of distress in a person's daily functioning. And criteria B is that it is not attributable to any other medical diagnosis. Further down in the DSM-5, it says that children are more susceptible to caffeine intoxication, as we already briefly talked about before. And then caffeine toxicity seen specifically in children, they listed the symptoms as tachycardia, CNS agitation, GI disturbance, and diuresis. Then moving on to caffeine withdrawal in the DSM-5. It is criteria A, prolonged daily use of caffeine. Criteria B is abrupt cessation or reduction in caffeine use followed within 24 hours by 3 or more of the following: headache, fatigue or drowsiness, dysphoric or depressed mood or irritability, difficulty concentrating, and even flu-like symptoms. Again, criteria C, the signs and distress that you can have from this impacts your daily life. And then criteria D is that it is not better attributed to another medical diagnosis. Further along in the DSM-5, it lists that withdrawal can last for 2 to 9 days, and you can even have headaches up to 21 days, and symptoms resolve within 30 to 60 minutes of caffeine ingestion. Interesting. Other caffeine disorders, we don't have to talk about them because they're very self-explanatory. Caffeine-induced anxiety, caffeine-induced sleep problems, and the DSM-5 favorite and unspecified related disorder to whatever chapter you are currently on. So caffeine effects of that are different depending on the milligrams that you're taking and the person that you are. Some people never develop tolerance or withdrawal to caffeine. It is, again, socially acceptable and legal as a stimulant. Adult and adolescent population studies have shown that anywhere from 20 to 100% of regular caffeine consumers exhibit signs of caffeine dependence. And studies showed that 100% of those that had dependence, it was from smaller sample size of high caffeine users, which is not generalizable to most of the population. So, is it addictive? While some caffeine users exhibit those characteristics of substance abuse and dependence, it is still not considered an addictive substance. However, it can be shown to alter other addictive properties of other drugs. In one study, there was caffeine pretreatment or co-administration, which was found to increase the rate of cocaine self-administration in rats, but they did not find any association in humans. If anything, cocaine users were less likely to consume caffeine because these two things generally do the same thing. So why not do cocaine instead of caffeine is the thought process there. And there's no evidence that caffeine use would lead to a cocaine addiction later on. What about caffeine and nicotine? This was a smaller cohort study in 2023 where they had findings that suggested that caffeine use was associated with early onset nicotine use. They said that youth experienced increased academic demands and changes in school structure and routine, obviously culture changing. Additionally, media use and delayed sleep preferences among these adolescents affected the likelihood of sleep deprivation, which could affect their decision to use both caffeine and nicotine products. And again, like we already discussed, going through puberty and all the changes in culture with that, it might be cooler and more popular, especially where they did this study. So they were seeing more kids using both substances. Caffeine and alcohol use. Consumption of energy drinks and alcohol is very, very popular. I feel like it's been around for quite some time. We obviously have counteracting mechanisms of action, leading people to not feel typical symptoms of alcohol intoxication. I think this is usually seen with much older teenagers and college students, most particular, where they want to stay up, they want to continue on being out and hanging out with the people that they're hanging out with. So they're going to start doing energy drinks in between caffeine drinks, or there's also some energy drinks that are included in alcohol drinks as well that you can see out there. Obviously, desire to drink could be increased, leading adolescents to drink more than intended because they are not feeling all those feelings of alcohol intoxication. And these individuals are more likely to drive because of that. There's also some other correlations found between energy drinks, smoking, alcohol, and cannabis consumption in adolescents. Those who drink energy drinks with alcohol were more likely to use other substances as well, such as marijuana, ecstasy, and cocaine. And there's also an increased risk of excessive alcohol consumption and misuse as adults. The very last this or that comparison slide that I have for you is kind of an all-encompassing on some older energy drinks with some of the newer energy drinks. Again, most of them are typically 200 milligrams of caffeine. There are some that are more, there are some that are less. What I really wanted to point out to you is that the older generation energy drinks, like your Monster, Rockstar, Nas, and Red Bull, these are high calorie, high sugar drinks with the same amount of caffeine. And then the newer energy drinks, which are marketed as a health drink, have low calories, zero sugar, again, same amount of caffeine. So I think it's just interesting to see kind of how things are changing from back not even too far off in the distant past until now. But again, all these products are very pretty to look at. You can find them almost anywhere, gas stations, grocery stores, other places as well, easily attainable by children. So what we know, what we have left to learn, and why we should be worried about it. Approximately 90% of adults report regular caffeine use, average daily intake. As you've seen, there's like a great span of what people are actually drinking. This particular article said about 230 milligrams per day. Top 3 sources of caffeine use in adults are coffee, soda, and tea. Since 1977, we've had a 70% increase in caffeine consumption among children and adolescents, which I think that's a pretty big jump. When caffeine intake is examined across body weight, children that were younger, 2 to 11, consumed about half a milligram per kilo per day. And then those young adolescents were consuming about 0.6 milligram per kilo per day compared to an average adult, which is about 1.3 milligrams per kilo per day. So children were consuming or are consuming about half of what an average adult is consuming of caffeine on a daily basis. So interesting to think about as us saying that caffeine should not be in the diet of children. They're already starting off at half of what we're taking on a daily basis. And it's supposedly not an addictive substance. To kind of summarize, as you now have maybe learned a little bit, caffeine products are located everywhere in drinks, food, and other supplements. They're very colorful. They are marketed towards children and young adolescents, and they're easily acquired out in the environment. There are a lot of studies out there, but it's more on the older children and adolescents. There's not enough studies overall that look at the physiological and psychological effects of caffeine in our pediatric population specifically. And childhood and adolescence is a period of rapid growth and development in the brain and body, where we're coming up with executive functioning, working on impulsivity and planning. It requires proper nutrition and sleep as an essential part of healthy development. So I think it's very important. Talking about caffeine, it's in the Well Child smart set that we all see when we're writing up our notes. But I think it's very important to bring it up in conversation, because I find that a lot of parents don't know all the products that their kids are taking in and what the caffeine content is in that. And even some children don't even know what the caffeine intake that they're doing during the day. And as we can see, there are a lot of adverse effects that can be experienced with that, that might have an impact on them, growth and development, and behaviors that happen later in life. So that's pretty much all I got. Those are my resources. Sorry you can't read it. I'm a big believer on the black slide, white print for learning. Thanks for coming. Questions? Karen?
But I like what you mentioned, I never think about that. For example, in our culture is like tea very common. We consume like breakfast, like everywhere. Even like we serve the like tea to like kids for breakfast because they drink that. We think it's healthy and per person drinks maybe like 3-4 cups like tea in a day. So it's also like culturally where we like have like immigrants, like immigrant patients, we can ask that like do they serve like tea to like their kids, because culturally like some people consume too much. Also like we serve it when like our kids are sick, like we put some honey and give tea. We think it's like healthy, so we need to consider that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, good point. Anybody else? Cool. I hope you learned something and think about what you're taking in on the daily basis. Dr. Wynant.
I find that as you're talking to kids about headaches, it's important to ask about caffeine intake. In summertime, they're going out and doing things outside. Some of the sports supplements have caffeine added to them, so they're going out to play football. They're taking a bunch of caffeine in their sports supplement before they go play football in the heat. They get dehydrated, yeah, and parents don't understand or really know. I've even had times where I've talked to families of kids who have heart disease and they know they're not supposed to take caffeine and they say, oh, all my friends go to Starbucks and I get the pink drink. That doesn't have any caffeine. And so we Google how much caffeine in a pink drink. And it's as much as any of the other stuff. People really just don't have any knowledge of how much caffeine